today to kind of talk about how to struggle, how if you're struggling with anxiety and stress over finding a job, so how to create mindfulness in your job search. And this idea and concept is obviously something that many people, whether you're a student or not a student, are living with right now, given the circumstances of what we're in today's world. And I think if my numbers are correct, last week there were over 800,000 people that 800,000 people that filed for unemployment, right? So that just goes to show you where the job market is, but also how this space that we're living in is kind of creating this level of stress and anxiety for people. And the thing that I always have to say when I talk to students or anybody about it is that you're not alone in this process, but you have total control of how you're allowing this process to make you feel, because it's not something that is permanent, it's temporary, right? And so the space that you're living in is to reach that goal of getting a job. So you have control of the process from beginning to end. And that's what we're going to talk about here is how much energy are we giving into the process itself that's causing and creating the stress and the anxiety as we go through it. So I'll also introduce myself, which I didn't do before. I did last time when we did this. My name is Jose Miguel Longo, and I'm the Director of Career Services at SUNY Poly. He, him, they. And if anyone ever has any questions about this, I'm happy to share and discuss and be here for you as a space. So let's change slides. So I don't want people to get overwhelmed from the get-go. I just wanted to make sure that when I did this, if the time that we spent together turned into a conversation, I had at least mapped out what we would be talking about. So if you want to take a screenshot of this or a picture of this, Stephen, you can. I know that oftentimes people typically have a lot of questions when it comes to this process. And so I just kind of outlined very briefly what are the things people can do. So I call this setting the intention. We're here to really eliminate the stress and anxiety and help you cope through it. And if you're feeling stress and anxiety, what to do in the moment of this process, but also understand, reflect, and really truly gain perspective is the objective, and that's what the goals are. We're going to talk about how to create some goals and set some timelines. What the process looks like for reducing anxiety and stress in the job search process, and then how to overcome the anxiety and what you can do to do that. So I've kind of gave some blurbs and tips. Again, my slides are not 100% what you would call like a PowerPoint, but they're there for you to navigate and read as we're having a conversation. Any questions on this so far before we shift to the next slide? Stephen, if you have any questions, or even you, Brianna or Sandy, if you want to add anything. Okay. So here's where this idea or the notion and the idea of the stress and the anxiety in the job search process comes from. So these are really important questions you want to ask yourself before you kind of embark in this journey, because if you're already in this place where you're feeling stressed out, overwhelmed, and anxious, asking yourself these questions may help you feel like, oh, maybe I have to go back to the beginning. Or maybe I didn't really think this through. I jumped in head first and I'm not really organized and prepared for how to tackle this. Or maybe I need to go talk to someone and ask for help because I just don't know what I'm doing. So, in addition to the questions I just said, these are really critical questions to kind of help you in the process. So, really understanding what is causing you the stress and the anxiety. What is it? If you can understand where it is and you can understand where it's coming from, that's going to help you overcome it, which is the most important thing. But that's going to help you also prevent it from coming back, right? Be able to understand that you have control over how you feel and these emotions and what they're giving you. And at the same time, how is this stress and anxiety making you feel? What is it specifically that's causing it? Is it because you're not hearing back from people? Is it because you've been applying to job after job after job and you're getting all these auto denies? Is it because you don't know what you're doing? What is it? What is making you feel that way? And owning it. And the one thing I always like to do when I'm in that point of where I'm feeling overwhelmed and stressed is I write it down. What is really making me feel this way? Because when you write it down, you're able to see it on paper, and then you can take a step back and have that moment, that aha moment to just say, oh, wow, it's not that bad. Like, I can overcome this. And if you know what to do, if you know what the tips and the strategies are, and you know how to overcome this, it will be easier. Just just know that the most important thing is that you have to be able to put in the work, which we'll talk about, to be able to get to the goal. But you don't need to allow the work of getting to that goal consume you. And that's really at the forefront of all of this. Um, then, writing down what your process is, what process do you currently have? And I think reflecting, which is important in this process too, is how is this process working for you? Because if you're getting overwhelmed and stressed, maybe you have to take a step back and look at your process to say, what can I do differently? Did you do your homework? And yes, there's homework. And we'll talk more about what that means here in a little bit. Do you have a solid strategy? It's so important that people really create a strategy for themselves, and no strategy is right or wrong. It's different for everybody because people have different ways of how they want to manage their job search process. But creating a strategy where you can actually identify your goals and deadlines is really important. For example, for people who don't ever know, for people that don't know what a strategy should look like, it's more about how many jobs you want to apply to a day, a week, and a month, and coming up with a number that's doable so that you're committing to that goal and that number, and that you're able to focus. And then with being able to document that, what day did you apply? And what is the follow through? What is the follow up? So, for example, if you applied to a job today, Wednesday, February 10th, I would say following up in 7 to 14 business days sounds pretty reasonable. So, making sure you mark your calendar or your Excel sheet to document that you applied today, and then you're going to follow up in 7 to 14 days. That should be part of your strategy. That's where the accountability comes to. And that's being able to hold yourself accountable to reflect on those things. And we'll go deeper into the strategy as we kind of go through this. And then are your documents and bios organized? So the cover letter and the resume are the two critical documents. And when I say bios, I mean, depending on what industry you're in, you may be required to have a digital portfolio, right? So some artists or graphic designers or freelancers have a digital portfolio where all of their projects or special projects live. And then there's LinkedIn, which is kind of like a substitute to your resume, but just know that not everyone will visit your LinkedIn profile. But making sure it's up to date, making sure it's clean, making sure that all the buzzwords and keywords that are relevant to your industry are there. So I put all these questions in here so that people can start to think about where they currently are and where they may need to change and move to allow themselves to be in a better place of maybe they weren't doing these things and now they have a better sense of it. This alone, by asking yourself these questions, should help reduce that level of stress and anxiety that you might be feeling. So the first thing you see on this page is in bright orange, and it says start with one thing at a time. This is critical. You have to give yourself the opportunity to know that you can't do it all at once. Yes, you can apply to multiple jobs a day because you've probably mastered by that point how to make sure your resume is tailored to the job. You've mastered how you can actually um, create a cover letter that's fluent and speaks the language of what the job is asking. But just know that you have to start with one thing at a time. When people get stressed and overwhelmed, it's because they're doing too many things at once. And so I've highlighted a tip here. So tip number one, and there's multiple tips. I don't I kind of combined some of them, they can be broken into two, but just for the purpose of time and for the purpose of what we're talking about here, I kind of combined some of them. So tip number one is we create stress in our head when we get anxious and overwhelmed. That stress then turns into anxiety, and then we want to run, right? We want to just run away from it. The only way you're going to overcome that is if you give yourself the time to breathe, walk away, give yourself a moment, take a break, and go for a walk, do a meditation, go exercise, do a journal, talk to someone. Step away from what's causing the stress and the anxiety in the moment so that you can go back and reflect on what is really causing it. And going back to those questions before, is it because you really don't know how to write the cover letter? Is it because you're not sure if this job is a good fit and you need someone to help you navigate it? Is because your resume is a hot mess and you really don't know what to do? What's causing the stress? But know that you can only do one thing at a time. When you put so many things on your plate to do at once, then you're hurting yourself more than you're helping yourself. And when we talk about the stress and the anxiety about the job search process, you want to give yourself space and time. Don't rush it. It's not a race. Yes, it's competitive, but it's not a competition. You have to really be in that mindset of, is this right for me? So, with starting one thing at a time, I also include, what do you want? Which is a really big question to ask. It's not meant to be a trick question. It's not meant to be a hard question, but it's meant to be reflective. Sorry, my dog's whining. It's meant to be reflective because when you're thinking about the job search process, it's important to have an idea of what you're searching for so you can create the most effective job search strategy. When you're looking for a job, don't you want the job to be feeling good for you and something that makes you happy and you want to live in it and it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside? I know I do. I would think anybody looking for a job wants to make sure that that company's culture and that company's motto and mission is really connected to them. The job search process can be tumultuous, it can be challenging, but it doesn't have to be a hard one. It's time consuming 100%. But that's because you want to be really devoted and dedicated to finding the best job for you. And remember, when you're a student, this isn't your last job. Just be really aware of that. And maybe sometimes people spend a whole lifetime working for one company, which is totally possible. Not very common today, but totally possible. But it's definitely not your last job. So be aware that you're going into this like this is entry level. This is a stepping stone. This is where I'm going to get some experience. This is where I'm going to get to know more about what I like and what I don't like. Maybe it's going to be an opportunity for you to reflect and realize that you don't want to be in this industry. You want to get into something else. Give it the time that it needs so that you can be more rewarding to yourself. The other thing that's important with what do you want is understanding what the industry you're looking to work in. This is so, so, so important. We have a tool within Career Services. It's 100% free and 100% online. That's called Vault. And these are industry guides. These are guides that help students explore what the jobs look like for that particular industry and how to really understand what the industry is looking for. These guides include videos, interviews, tutorials to help students be able to understand what are people doing in this industry. So there's one for engineering, there's one for computer science, there's one for cybersecurity. You name the industry, there is a guide. And it's all 100% digital, it's all 100% online. So when you're up at 1 or 2 in the morning, instead of gaming, go read one of these guides and give yourself the time to connect with the job search process and connect with your industry. Because the affirmation of understanding is the most important affirmation you can give yourself. When you're more equipped with the knowledge of what it is you're trying to achieve, you're so much more closer to your goal. When you don't know and it's so unknown, of course you're going to feel overwhelmed. Of course you're going to feel anxious because you don't know. You're so uncertain about it. But if you're able to take the time to do the homework and put in the time to recognize what needs to be done, you're then able to connect to it more easily. The other thing that's important is what type of job do you see yourself in? Once you've looked at and you've kind of done your homework about the industry, write down what this vision of a job looks like to you. I always like to do vision boards with people when we're in an exploration discovery phase. And I think it really helps someone visualize where they want to be. Maybe it's a vision board for the next 5 years. Maybe it's a vision board for the next 10 years. Maybe it's a vision board of where you want your life to be. But you can create a vision of your job search process, of the job you want to be in. Do you like to be indoors or outdoors? Do you like to be behind a desk working by yourself? Or do you like to be working in groups? Do you like working hands-on? Do you like working with computers? Like, ask yourself all these fundamental questions of what do you like and what do you want? That will help you get a better understanding of what you should be doing. It's not intended to be hard. Again, I'm going to keep probably saying that the whole entire time we're chatting today, but I want to make sure that it's really giving yourself the space, the energy, and time so that your anxiety and stress from up here goes down to here. And I'll be honest, it's okay to sometimes feel anxious. And here's why. You're growing when you feel that way. There's a fear coming into you because you're nervous about something. Something is causing that. Not every time that we feel this stress or the anxiety is it bad. Sometimes we confuse that. Sometimes, for example, if you're anxious and stressed because you're going on an interview, think about what that means, right? That's not a negative feeling. That's a positive feeling because you want to be the best you can be in that space and time. So don't always think that the anxiety and the stress of this process is always negative, but allow yourself to create a positive space in those moments. Take those deep breaths and know that you got this. Own the actual process and own what you're living through. I want to pause for a second, just see how everyone is doing. If there's any questions, any comments, I can talk for hours and I forget that there's people there. So just tell me how everyone is doing and where we are.
I just have a question, Jose, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
What is the name of that app that, or is it a website that they can view?
Vault? Are you talking about Vault?
Vault, yeah.
VALUT. Yep. So it's on our website under resources.
Okay.
And students need to use their SUNY Poly email to log in.
Okay.
We've had it for 3 years now as a tool, and it's grown over the years. But I've been using it in career services for almost over a decade now.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I loved what you said about stress. And I don't know if you're familiar with Kelly McGonigal. I can't pronounce her last name, Kelly McGonigal. And she wrote The Upside of Stress several years back. And the book talks about exactly what you're saying. Like, stress doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, stress can be a really good thing that we can use to catapult things that we need to get done. So a certain degree of stress is actually really important, and it ensures that we're taking on the tasks that we need to take on. So it just reminded me of that book. So
Yeah.
it's kind of cool. Yeah.
And I think the space that we see it in the space that we're living in,
yeah,
for where the stress is coming from, what you're trying to achieve is all positive,
Yeah.
right? And so if you're able to relate how the experience is making you feel, give it the energy that it wants, but don't let it take over to where you're actually feeling like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. Walk away from
Yeah.
it, take a break.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is great stuff.
Steven, and you had a question.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, like, how long does it take for someone to kind of master the kind of like managing both the stress and anxiety when you're in the interviewing process? Is there like a time frame to mastering it?
So the interview, so it's all about practice, right? I think with practice comes confidence, and with practice comes a better sense of knowledge. The timeline for that, I think, is different for everybody. I don't think there's an exact science. I think it's based on you meeting yourself where you need to be to really be able to know that you feel comfortable going into an interview. I think it's going to be different for everybody. I don't have like a true definitive answer to give you, other than the more practice you get in interviewing, the more confidence you're going to feel. It goes back to also doing your homework. So knowing the company, what they're hiring for, understanding what they do, understanding what they're about, who their clients are, who they serve, understanding the job and what the job is asking, doing the research. That's how you build that confidence too. There's no right or wrong way about doing it, but I think that some people have to work a little bit harder because they may not have that immediate sense of being able to walk into a room, owning it and walking out and be like, I got this, I'm ready to go. Not everyone has that ability to do that. But when you have to do the work, armoring yourself and being prepared is the best way to go at it. Big Interview, which is one of the best interviewing tools out there, I will say, is you, and I've talked to you about this before, Stephen, do all the tutorials and trainings on there. Pick the interviewing based on the industry. You can search by industry. You can search by job type. You can search by level of interview based on the level of the job. And the AI tool, which we've adopted now 100% integrated, will give you feedback and response on how you respond to the questions. And then you can share that with your faculty, peers. You can share with me, anybody who you want to share it with for feedback. And practice is how it happens. I'm very, very, very fortunate that I have no problems talking and that I can do impromptu speaking. You give me a topic, I can do it for 20 minutes and keep going and not have a problem. But not everybody has that skill. And you have to practice, practice, practice to get to that point. You will know in yourself when you're there. But you need to put in the time and the energy to do that. And that means that, if it means going to Big Interview and creating a schedule for yourself to say, I'm going to do 3 practice interviews a week so that I can get better and build up my confidence, and really taking the criticism and the feedback and applying it to every single interview you do, that's how you get better. And maybe you say, my goal is in a month to really feel confident about my interviewing. Set that goal for yourself. I think that's a totally doable goal, because you're still in the job search process. You're still in school. Maybe you're searching for an internship now in grad school. So giving yourself that space and time to say, I want an internship for summer, but in the month of February, I'm going to practice my interviewing skills while I'm applying to jobs. So that's one way of saying, okay, how am I going to master this for myself?
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So this next space that I want to kind of jump into, and I may have touched on it already, because like I said before, I have a tendency of just talking and not paying attention to what slides are, but slides are there for visible learners. I am a visual learner myself, and so I like to make sure there's something there for other people. So what is the game plan here, right? We talked about the feelings and the processing of the feelings, and not how not to let the feelings take over. But if you don't have a plan, then those feelings are going to come back and they're going to take over. So creating a plan is really, really intentional. It's really purposeful, but it's going to be effective. And I'm not going to give you a plan that's specific to anybody. I'm just going to talk about what a plan could look like, because I think that everyone has to recognize how they organize themselves and what type of organizational structure works for them. And when it comes to job searching, there's so many ways of doing this. There's no right or wrong way, but having a plan is really instrumental. But I first want to jump into the tip. So staying positive. It's always hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel when you're going through a job search process, but just know that you're doing the work. And every time you submit a new application, that you're one step closer to that light at the end of the tunnel, right? Doing the work and taking the steps and taking action is getting you closer. The goal is to get a job. The goal is to be able to allow this process to not take over your whole entire existence. And the goal is to stay positive throughout the whole process, so you can give yourself the space of making sure you're achieving all the things you want to achieve. Staying positive is so important, because you will feel like, how many more rejections am I going to get? And that hurts, right? But if you're getting rejected, you have to ask yourself, what am I doing wrong? Don't walk away from the rejection and saying, okay, oh, well, their loss. Yes, their loss, great mindset tool. But what am I doing wrong that I could change differently about why I'm getting rejected? Is it my resume? Is it my cover letter? Or is it that it's just not a good fit? And that goes back to, what is your game plan? If you're not strategic about the intention you're putting into every single job, it's going to lead you to fail. And the more jobs you apply to without being intentional, the more rejections you're going to get. So here's what's important in this process. Where do you want to start? And I always think that looking at the platforms you use are based on where you're going to have the most effective search process. So, LinkedIn, Handshake, Indeed, Monster, etc. I don't know what other platforms out there that are still in existence. I don't even know if Hot Jobs still exists, but it was a platform that was really popular back in the days. Monster is still in existence because I've gotten emails from Monster on jobs. But I know that the most common ones are LinkedIn and Indeed. Handshake, obviously, pretty much, I'd say at this point, 80% of colleges across the US use Handshake. So you know that as a student, it's going to be a go-to tool for you for job searching. So the platform makes a difference, but your keywords in the platform is also important. But you have to make sure you did the homework about the industry to understand if you're in the right place, to understand what the keywords are that you're going to use to search for the job. That is really important. And then once you've identified, okay, I've got my search, I've got my filter, and I have a page that has, 50 plus jobs in it, what do I do next? And it's really coming down to you deciding what works for you. Are you going to apply to 5 jobs a day, which is 25 jobs a week if you don't include the weekends? And I can't do math, so I can't tell you how many jobs that is a month. But that's a lot. It's a lot. And I want to take you back to the days where I was unemployed back in the recession of 2009, 2008 with the housing market. And they were still using paper in the unemployment situation for you to track how many jobs you're applying to, because the only way you can get unemployment back in the day was to certify that you were actively looking for a job. And I remember using that as a job search strategy to be effective in achieving a goal. I'm very competitive. So to me, it became like, I want to overcome the number of jobs I applied to this week compared to last week. That doesn't have to be for you, but taking that approach can help you in the process. But remember, you want it to be intentional and you don't want to overcommit, because when you start to overcommit, then you get sloppy and then it becomes messy and you're not really being intentional. So you have control over what that number looks like. Maybe you start with one job a day because that's all the bandwidth you have to give yourself space in. And maybe that's all the energy you really have to really take the resume, tailor the resume to the job, write the cover letter, and then submit an application. Those things take time. It is not a thing about it being easy, because it's not hard. It's relatively easy. Once you do it, it should become natural and easy for you. It's just a time consuming process. So applying to 5 jobs a day is a lot. I just use as an example, but maybe you start with one a day, you track them, and you take that filter that you created with whatever job platform you used, and you go back to the jobs that are on there, but making sure that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Just because you found the job that speaks to you the most doesn't mean that you should only apply to that job and forget about the rest. That's not how this works. The more jobs you apply to, the easier it becomes for you to really connect to the job, but also for you to get an interview. The one thing that's really important to recognize, and I'm not saying this to scare people, I'm saying it to be really realistic, is that pre-COVID, there was an average of 70 applicants to one job. Pre-COVID. In today's world, it's over 150 applicants to one job. Okay. So yeah, it's competitive. I'm not telling you because I want to scare you. I'm telling you because there are people who lost their jobs that are looking for anything they can get. And the thing that you want to make sure you're doing when you're applying to jobs is making sure you stand out above everyone else. And so doing your homework and reading the job description and reading what the requirements and the responsibilities are, and making sure you understand how you see yourself in that job. And if you can actually do what the job is asking you, then great, apply. If you don't feel the job is good and it's not fitting you checking the boxes, I say if there's 10 bullets there, you must check at least 8 of them, that you can do those tasks. At least 8. And that's more than 50%. But you want to be 100% sure before you invest the time and the energy into that job. Because the intentionality of you being able to get a call back is what you have at the line. That's what you're risking. Now, when you talk about the time you're spending in applying, it's not failed time, it's not lost time, it's just called practice. And it's practice to help you become more self-aware, and practice to make sure that you're able to actually do and fulfill what needs to be done. The more aware you are about the actual job description and the responsibilities, the easier it will be to write that cover letter. Cover letters can be really hard. I've worked with students sometimes for weeks to try and find the best way to write a cover letter. But it has to come from you knowing what your experiences are, knowing what your skills are, and how it's transferable to the job. And that's really important. So making sure you're creating a strategy. I know I jumped into what the next slide has already. That's just my flow, but really making sure at the root of it that you create a plan that's going to keep you to be successful. Okay, the name of the game here is really to making sure you're consistent applying to jobs, and that you can then lead to that next callback or lead to that next space of being able to be considered. Sometimes it's a screening, right? The screening process can get you to the interview process. So creating your strategy. So we talked a lot about this already, but I want to jump into the tip and then the self-awareness piece. So tip number 3 is doing the homework and being self-aware. So the ultimate time saver when it comes to applying to a job is reading the job description. I talked about this already, but you have to make sure that you can live in the space of what the job is. If you think that a job is really for you, but you can't do what the job is asking you to do, then you really need to self-reflect and have sense of self-awareness of what this job is. Maybe the job is for someone who has 3 to 5 years experience, and you're not reading that line on the job description because you're so lost paying attention to, oh, I can do this job, but it's not for you. You got to move on, friend. You can't soak it in and pretend that it's there for you when it's not. Don't waste your energy and precious time applying to things that are not for you. There's dozens of jobs out there. There's lots of jobs out there. And when we talk, and one thing I want to really point out is that entry level jobs are very different than jobs for people who are in the job market now that may have been beyond their education. Yes, companies have reduced the number of jobs they're recruiting for, but that doesn't apply to the industry of STEM. STEM has grown and it's pivoted during this time. And there's lots and lots of jobs out there, but you have to make sure that the job is for you. Self-awareness in a job search process is everything. And what you need to do is making sure that you read. Reading is fundamental. Reading the job description, literally, when I talk to students, I'm like, I want you to print it. Print it. If you can print it, print it. If you can't print it, put it in a Word document, copy and paste it into a Word document. I want you to shred that information apart. Because then you need to ask yourself, do you really want this job or not? How much time and attention are you going to give this job if it's not speaking to you? When you go and read the description, what resonates with you? How are you feeling? Are you connecting to it? Does it make sense? Does it make you feel the warm and fuzzy we talked about before? And when you look at the responsibilities, how many of those can you do? When you become self-aware that you say, excuse my language, oh shit, I can't do half these things, walk away from it. I'm never going to discourage anyone from applying to everything because that's on you. But when you're in a moment of stress and anxiety and you're feeling overwhelmed, you want to be intentional about what you're doing. So that's really, really important. Does this make sense? Is this resonating in the moment, Stephen? How are you feeling about that?
No, I absolutely agree. Because it kind of relates to the situation I'm in because all my courses are all engineering courses, and I'm working in a biology lab for my research. So it's kind of like trying to find the balance between applying to jobs that are either engineering, or the one that I particularly wanted to do was biomedical engineering jobs, and not leaning more towards the biology. So it's kind of trying to find that medium between those two things right now.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things you need to ask yourself is where are those jobs, right? Where can you find them? Where are they living? I always say when you're a student, the best resource you have is talking to your faculty and talking to your professors because they come from industry. They've lived in that space. They know all the context and connections. And hopefully they're able to provide you with some resources to help you in that process so that you can be more connected to the search process. And then knowing that you have someone there you can talk to about it. But what's really important when you're a student is making sure that if you don't have all the experience required for the job, that you're able to adopt your coursework into the job, into the resume, so that it speaks to the job description. Being able to reflect on what did the course teach you, so the person reading your resume can see how you can do the work of the job. Being able to share what the special projects were that you achieved and did. Talk about that lab that you're doing now, what you're doing, what the research is. And then share whatever skills and equipment or things that it is that you're learning or you're using so that it connects to the job. You want to be able to share what is transferable about those classroom and class experiences.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So this is the last slide. And again, like this is conversational for me typically. I'm using the slides as kind of like a guide, so to speak. But tip number 4, and again, I've doubled up on these tips. There's tons of tips that you can Google out there. This was just me trying to be conservative of space and time and really wanting to have a conversation. So tip number 4 is having time and patience. The journey to getting a job has steps and there's a process for it, but recognize that you have control over how the process makes you feel. You have control over your time and how you spend it. The energy you give into that time to do those tasks is yours. And how you feel about the energy is up to you. If you want to stay positive in the process, it's only up to you. If you want to give it negative energy and feel overwhelmed and stressed in the process, you have to own that and then recognize you need to step away for a minute. It's okay to feel overwhelmed in the job search process and know that you've spent a month of providing hard work and dedication and walking away. Walk away for a couple of weeks and say, you know what? I'll come back to this. I need a break from it. That's okay, especially now, given the circumstances of what we're living in. I know a lot of people feel that because there's a time clock with graduating and they have to have a job before they graduate. Know that you need to give yourself the space in between to breathe as you're going through that process. And a lot of students who struggle with the job search process, to be really honest, comes from the fact that they didn't get any experience while they were a student. So the stress comes in their senior year, and they're in their second semester of their senior year in January and February, and they're like, oh shit, I didn't get any experience. I didn't get an internship. Now what do I do? How do I look for a job? 99% of the time, that's where the student usually is. If a student has successfully secured an internship their sophomore year, their junior year, and has participated in extracurricular clubs, has demonstrated leadership activities, has maybe even gone on a co-op, but has gotten some sort of experience that's really tying to the work they're going to do when they graduate, they should have no stress or they should have no anxiety over the job search. Maybe stress about feeling like, oh, well, May's almost here and I haven't gotten a job yet. Maybe that's the stress they have. But when you're able to showcase your accomplishments and what you have achieved, and you really did the hard work of actually being a student who wasn't just focused on your academics, because let's be honest, you need to get experience in this process. Recruiters are looking for people who have experience, especially when you're talking about entry-level jobs. They want to make sure that students are actually doing work other than just their coursework. So it's really important that if you haven't done an internship, if you haven't done a co-op, or you haven't had any experiential learning opportunities, that you use your coursework to help showcase what it is that's necessary for the person who's looking at your resume to be able to reflect on if you can do that job. It doesn't mean that you can't get a job. It just means it's going to take you longer to get a job than the person who's done the work before you. But you have to be aware of where you are in the process, and you have to be aware of the work you need to do to get there. So tailoring a resume to every single job is critical. It's one of those things that I think students think it's a joke. And I laugh because it's the truth, though. You can't read a job description and not pretend to include keywords in your resume that the job description has. These applicant tracking systems are really, really smart, and they're very, very savvy. And recruiters are filtering applicants based on, do they have the skills, the keywords, and the experience that the job is asking them for? So it's your job as a job seeker to making sure that you're tailoring your resume to the job, so that out of those 150 applicants that are applying to that job, you're in the top 10. Tailoring the resume to the job works. It is time consuming, but it's required. The other thing is the cover letter. Some people will argue that the cover letter is obsolete. I think that it's on its way out, but I can't predict the future and I don't know how much more time it has. But I can tell you that a cover letter is a critical resource for companies, recruiters, and hiring managers to understand if you can write clearly and effectively. It's a tool that's used for someone to understand the picture that's not in the resume, that can tell a story of your experience. Writing and using a cover letter is essentially fundamental part of the job search process. So if you think that just half-assing and using the same cover letter with every single job you apply to is going to help you, maybe that one company who doesn't read it might be okay with it. But I can tell you right now, there's a lot of companies that don't look at it that way, and they're looking at every single cover letter. I'll tell you, from when I used to be in recruiting, I didn't read the cover letter first. I would look at the resume, and if the resume met the criteria of what the person needed to do to get the job as an applicant, I would then read the cover letter to determine, is this person worth screening? So my recruitment process required me 5 steps before someone was even considered an actual candidate for an interview. And that's just at my level of being a recruiter, not even the level to getting the person to actually connect with the hiring manager. So just think about how many companies may have a similar strategy that's a little bit deep, but it's just based on the type of jobs that I was recruiting for. Think about how many companies that may have a similar process and how they do their recruiting. So the name of the game here in this particular step is giving yourself the time and the patience to commit to the job you're applying to, and know that it takes time for the process to come to reality. Having patience with each job that you're applying to, making sure you're tracking of when you're applying to the job, making sure you're tailoring your documents to every single job. If you feel that you're getting overwhelmed by what you've done so far and not getting responses, walk away for a minute, come back to it. Give it a week, give it a day. Give it the time that it needs to breathe, but making sure you're creating a strategy that you can use effectively to follow up. And allowing yourself to connect back after the 7 to 14 business days to say, okay, you know what? It's been enough time. I haven't heard back from them. I'm going to reach out, looking for who that person is that you can reach out to. Maybe it's just an inbox that says hr@blankcompany.com, and you send an email saying, my name is so-and-so, I recently applied to a blank position, just wanted to follow up and check on the status of my application. Let it be, send it out to the universe. Because it can feel overwhelming and it can feel daunting that your application fell into a black hole. But when you take action and you take steps to take the time to look at where your information has gone, that can provide some insight. But you have to be patient, and you have to know when you need to take a break from it, and you have to remain positive. That's all I have to share today. I can go a lot more deeper, but would rather spend more time answering any questions we have right now. And Stephen, we've connected before on your job search process, so I'm here for you if you have any questions.
I have a question. This is kind of like a similar question to the first question I asked you. So, let's say if you already went through the whole entire process and you're waiting for like like the answer, and then they give you the no answers. Let's just say, would you feel stressed at that point, going through the entire process and then getting the no for the job?
So I just want to confirm and understand what you're saying to me. You're talking about the rejection, meaning that you applied to a job and you were rejected on the basis of whatever it might be. They're looking at other applicants right now and they're not considering you. You're specifically talking about the rejection, correct?
Yes, it's kind of going into, like, you went through the interview process
Mhm.
and the similar stuff, and you get the rejection.
Yeah. So you have to reflect on and this is the thing that people have to accept is that you will oftentimes will not get feedback when you're rejected from a job search process. You can request the feedback, but they're not there for that. That's not what they're there for. They're there to hire the most qualified person that can do the job. And so what you need to do is reflect on, well, what could I have done differently in my interview? Because the thing that's really important is that your resume got you to the interviewing process. So you can check that step off. You went from being an applicant to a candidate. But as a candidate, you now have to control the narrative of who they see. And that means you need to build your confidence in your interviewing tactics and skills to demonstrate that you own this job and this job is for you, and that you're going to serve them what they need and you're the best candidate possible. And if you're not showing up to that interview in that way, they're going to see that and they're going to move on to the next person. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
So you need to reflect on, what did I not do in the interview that I could have done differently? How can I improve my interviewing skills? What can I do to answer the questions that they're asking me? Maybe you're not answering the questions clearly enough. Maybe you're not listening to the question and you're giving an answer you think you need to give. That interview piece is critical because you can apply to hundreds of jobs and land the interview, but if you're not getting a job after you go through the interviewing process, then it means you have to work on your interviewing skills. And that's practice. And that's building your confidence. And that's showing up and that day of the interview and owning it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.